Hey guys, welcome back to another video. It's your boy, Libertarian Election Predictions, back at it again with another video. So today what I'm doing is I'm trying a new platform. It's called OBS. So apparently my computer's audio is not working under Wondershare Filmora X, which is usually what I used for my videos. And because it isn't working, I had to think of an alternative, and that's why I couldn't make videos. I wish I could have made some videos, but unfortunately due to some technical problems, and then I had to look around for new platforms. I had to kind of put my videos on hold. Anyway, today we'll be focusing on the 2024 presidential election. I know, guys, I'm thinking of shaking it up rather than doing election predictions. Kind of talk about what's going on in the in today, like gas prices and all that, and how that'll affect the Senate. And we pretty much know that it will favor the GOP, but but it goes more in depth. So um, I'm kind of going to try to diversify my content. I know that could maybe get more views, and I feel like it's kind of boring finding presidential scenarios. I mean, there are like 1,000 scenarios I could put up. Like I could literally put up Mo Brooks for crying out loud, but the dude lost his primary quite handily against moderate Republican Katie Britt. So I mean, that means Mo Brooks is not really a GOP presidential contender. Anyway, so today we will be focusing on Ron DeSantis versus Kamala Harris. So you guys might see running mates. I think these are what I think what DeSantis who would most likely choose. I think Garcia would be a good one as he is low profile, and sometimes having a low profile is good too because you're more favorable to the voters, whereas Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, really unpopular in the Biden administration. So let's see how that impacts the election. Anyway, let's go safe states. Washington, safe. I would say Washington is likely because Washington is definitely a leftist bastion. Bernie Sanders absolutely kicked ass in that primary in 2020, and he also kicked Hillary Clinton in 2016. And Washington has a history of electing left wing politicians. So definitely a lot of these more progressive Bernie bro voters will not come out for someone like Harris, who's basically a corporate stooge. Oregon, same thing. Oregon also does have a tradition of electing lefties to Congress, and I think in the May 17th primary in Oregon's fifth, I believe, I don't know whether it's second or fifth, but I think yeah, it's the fifth. Kurt Schrader was ousted by a more progressive Jamie McLeod Skinner, and I personally thought that's a good riddance because at least we have someone who will fight for us. So yeah. So California, that's probably going to be safe. Garcia might help him with DeSantis with Hispanics, but again, California is California. It's gonna vote Democrat by at least 25 points. Even someone as unpopular as Harris could win California by 19 to 20%. But I will say that the state of Alaska will be safe. I think DeSantis will be able to capture some of the Trump voters who ran away. The Trump 2016 voters who ran away from him in 2020, and he could appeal a little bit more to the libertarians in Alaska. 'Cause I think Alaska is more like a libertarian state. Plus, it's also pretty more like in elections wise, it's relatively progressive. It has like top four ranked choice, and I think that's a great system of voting. Sure, there will be I think the Democrats and the Republicans will be dominant, but at least smaller parties have a chance, and that's why I personally like Alaska and Maine, and I think our country should be modeled based off of them because it gives voters a preference. So I feel like the GOP puts up some neoconservative, the America First can make their own party without having to worry about splitting the votes, and the progressives on the Democrat Party can make their own party without having to worry about vote splitting. Whereas in their current system, first past the post, we know how crap it is. Where we are often limited to the Democrats or GOP, and we have to pick teams. And I do not like picking teams. As a future American voter, I definitely will not be picking Democrats or Republicans. I think they're just too beholden to corporate interests, and definitely I really want to shake up. But unfortunately, it requires a lot of advocation from the general population, and Congress has to act on it. but I don't think so. Moving on to say Hawaii, that's safe Democrat. I mean, it depends on how Harris could do with the Asian vote because the Asian vote is also trending a little bit to the GOP. Maybe not as fast as Hispanics. I think they're relatively behind compared to Hispanics, but I think it's still going to be a safe state. So moving to the Southwest, so starting with Arizona. Arizona is really interesting. I would probably give it as lean Republican. Here's why. Arizona narrowly flipped to Joe Biden in 2020. He won it by like I think 11,000 votes. So because of that, and Biden is really really unpopular in Harris. And if he steps aside, that's a good riddance. But at the same time, you get Harris, and we all know the DNC or we can call it the establishment will like prop up Kamala Harris and shove us down our throats. So obviously, she's more unpopular than Joe Biden. So if you had Joe Biden, I predict he'd lose Arizona by 2 to 3 points. But with Harris, I could say DeSantis would absolutely like blow it out of the water, maybe 4 to 5 points in favor of DeSantis. Although I could put it as likely, but I'd say Arizona is still a relatively suburban state. So moving on to the state of Nevada, I think Nevada might be lean Republican, and I know it's a pretty big call, but I would say like ever so slightly. It won't be like 2 points. Maybe I'm thinking 1 to 1.5 points for the GOP. The Hispanics are moving to the right, and with someone like Mike Garcia, who has neighboring state advantage and can help out with Hispanic voters. Like if I think of DeSantis and the GOP in general, just do more Hispanic voter outreach. I think the GOP could get Hispanics as a major minority voting bloc, and Harrison being really unpopular will get low turnout in Las Vegas, which will definitely hurt the Democrats. And we are already seeing it now as Catherine Cortez Masto is really struggling against Adam Laxalt. And like it's not like Laxalt was a terrible candidate in 2018. It's just the environment wasn't his environment. So yeah. So just to save time, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, most of Nebraska, that and I'd say the second district is lean Republican because it's a suburban district. Biden's unpopular and it's redistricted to become a little bit more Republican. So yeah, Kansas, Oklahoma. Oops, actually I'll rate Texas as likely Republican. So much of these states, very self-explanatory. But Texas, I could say safe if I was like more like looking into things. But I think Texas is still like shifting to the Democrats, even though the Rio Grande Hispanics are moving to the right. I think there's still some suburban areas that are trending left, and that could counteract the Rio Grande. But it's still undeniable that the Rio Grande Valley Hispanics are moving to the right. Just last week, we saw a Republican, Myra Flores, winning in a heavily Latino district, and that was actually Philemon Vela Jr.'s seat, and then he retired early to become CEO or head of some company. I'm not sure why, but I'm not going to go into that. But it's very monumental as Hispanics won that seat for the first time in like 150 years, so or over a century. So I mean, if Republicans could keep up that momentum and keep expanding their outreach, no doubt in my mind, Texas could be 12 to 13 points in favor of DeSantis. Plus, I think DeSantis will bring back a lot of those moderate suburban voters who didn't like Trump's brand and like Trump's toxicity. Because here's the thing about Trump, he's good in all the aspects, but like, the one thing that I could really that we could majority of us could agree on, he's a bit toxic. His rhetoric, could be nationalist, and does appeal to the worker. I feel at the same time you're kind of, turning off, voters that were historically Republican. So I think DeSantis could like run a fine line, and DeSantis has many good running mates he can choose from. Like Garcia, I think would be good because he won in like a Democratic leaning district and is Trumpian, so that could help him, and he's populist in that district too. And Glenn Youngkin would be a great option as as he could help, as Glenn Youngkin's more of a suburban Trump candidate, as he can like capture the Trump voters, and he managed to do that in November of last year. So yeah. So moving a little bit to the west, Colorado. Colorado probably would be lean Democrat. Colorado was almost solid for Joe Biden. I think it went 13.5% in favor of Biden, but things have changed, and gas prices are really high, and everything is going wrong, and Harris already being super unpopular. She's not going to energize anybody. Whilst Colorado is like Washington, Oregon is relatively progressive in its politics. Like they have legal weed, they legalize drugs, and one of the most like socially liberal states too. So I think a lot of these, and a very millennial heavy state too. So I don't think Harris would do very well with millennials, but I think at the end of the day, Denver and its suburbs will probably save her from like losing the state altogether. Although I think a narrow 3 to 4 point victory, same as what Hillary Clinton won by in 2016. Although in a lot of aspects, I'd say Harris is worse than Clinton. And if I were to pick between Clinton and Harris, I'd probably pick Clinton because at least Clinton knows something and Harris is just naive. New Mexico, I'd probably rate that as lean Democrat too. You can see that in New Mexico, it's a very oil heavy state, and like Kamala Harris is not very oil friendly, and that could really hurt her, particularly as Hispanics trend to the right. Although I'd say the New Mexican Hispanics are probably different than the ones in Rio Grande and Cubans in Florida, but I mean, the GOP probably is motivated to now outreach to Hispanics, and I think Harris does not appeal very well to Hispanics. So that's the reason why I think New Mexico will be lean. I think it'll be about the same as Colorado. I would say 2.5 to 3.5 points in favor of Harris. Now moving into the deep South, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, South Carolina. These are all Missouri. These are all undoubtedly safe for DeSantis. No doubt in my mind, he'll absolutely crush Harris in the rural areas and even suburban areas. And so that probably gets in West Virginia. I'll probably rate too as safe, so that you can get it out of the way. So now moving on to the state of Iowa. Iowa will probably give that a safe Republican. As you probably know, it's rapidly trending to the right. Iowa, very rural, very white state too, and Harris absolutely does not appeal to anyone. So, and coupled with her being at what, like a mid 20 approval rating or even low 20, I could say, she's definitely not going to win Iowa or at least even get close to being competitive. I think DeSantis will comfortably blow her out of the water here. Um, Minnesota. Minnesota is really interesting because it's always that state that seems to be the bluest out of the Rust Belt, and always seems to be the state that kind of likes the Democrats. And I'm not sure why, but but like Minnesota is not like the other Rust Belt states. Well, sure, Minnesota is fairly rural as a state, but like Minnesota is fairly rural as a state, but I think that Minnesota, unlike Wisconsin, Michigan, Wisconsin, or Iowa, it has like some probably has population in Minneapolis, and the suburbs are fairly liberal. And Minneapolis and the St. Paul are relatively liberal cities, so I think that's what saves her. But I could say Minnesota could flip to the GOP, but I would say in reality, I would say Harris gets it by a tilt margin. I think it'll come down to maybe 6,000, 7,000 votes, so it'll probably separate DeSantis and Harris. But I think the Harris will probably still get the W in Minnesota because Minnesota typically leans Democrat and typically votes Democrat in the federal level. Although it could change in the near future, but as the more rural working class counties become more Republican, unless Democrats radically rechange their approach and become more favorable to the working class. But For as I see right now, those counties will continue to shift Republican, maybe affecting the state, but I still think Minneapolis has a big enough presence to probably get Harris over the edge. However, Wisconsin, I probably rate that as lean Republican, probably in the upper lean Republican margins, like 4 to 5. Um, Wisconsin's a state that's trending to the right. You have a lot of rural. Wisconsin's very rural of a state, and its rural areas are driving it rapidly to the right. Like you could see a massive change from 2008 to 2012 when Obama crushed McCain in rural Wisconsin to 2016 where Donald Trump crushed Hillary in rural Wisconsin. Um, Harris is just so unpopular. She's not going to motivate anyone. Plus, Wisconsin, I mean, though trending right, it also has like a history of being relatively progressive. So I think a more progressive candidate could probably do better in the state of Wisconsin. And it's a general trend in the Rust Belt as more progressive candidates do well in the Rust Belt. So yeah, but I still think Harris has no enthusiasm. No one is going to turn out. Everyone that I know does not like her. So yeah. Yeah, Illinois, oops, I meant to rate that as likely Dem. It's still going to go Dem because Chicago, we all know Chicago dominates the state. You can have 101 counties going Republican, and still, Chicago just saves the day for the Dems. Indiana will be safe Republican. Oops, I accidentally meant to put Indiana, but Ohio, I rate that as safe Republican. Ohio, the rural areas are just trending to the right very fast, and there is now more rural votes than urban votes, and Democrats are losing strength everywhere in the state. And coupled with Harris being so unpopular, I see that as a perfect storm for Ohio to be these 15, 16 points in favor of the GOP, or at least in favor of DeSantis. So even if DeSantis is a little bit weaker than Trump with the more America first, working class voters, that Harris's unpopularity alone is enough to tip them for DeSantis to do as well or even slightly better than Trump. Whereas if you're running a more popular Democratic candidate like John Fetterman, I think that's where you see DeSantis struggle. But I still think 2024 will be a strong year for the GOP. I think these next 5 6 years will be mark a high point for the GOP, and then 2028 we might see it to start to go the other way. But yeah. Moving on to the state of Michigan. Michigan, I'd probably rate that as lean Republican. Donald Trump won it by 0.23% in 2016 and lost it in 2020. But now Michigan, given the environment, she's gonna get low turnout in Detroit because what you guys have noticed in a lot of these swing states is low turnout. I feel like Harris does not excite the Democratic base, and there are definitely a lot more better candidates like Sherrod Brown or John Fetterman or Andy Bashir who could at least motivate the base, even if they won't necessarily win the presidency, but at least they could somewhat motivate the base to come out. But Harris absolutely not, and as a result, she's gonna get low turnout in Detroit, and DeSantis will absolutely kick ass and destroy, rip her to pieces in the rural areas. So that is enough to put Wisconsin. I'll take my best prediction to be 1.1 to maybe 2.2%. DeSantis is favored. Moving on to Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania is interesting as it's voted Democrat most of the time, but I'm sorry, I have to give it to DeSantis. Again, Pennsylvania just I won't say it's necessarily trending to the right. I mean, Pennsylvania's always been close. Like a lot of people don't realize it. A lot of my Dem friends don't realize it either, but it's always been close. It just Obama was just relatively popular and just was the right guy for Pennsylvania. But again, Pennsylvania will definitely will not be a Harris state. She's going to face low turnout in the suburbs, and I feel like DeSantis will improve in southeastern Pennsylvania, which I think is tantamount in Pennsylvania for any party to win. They have to do and get the suburbs, and if DeSantis DeSantis will definitely narrow that up in like Chester, Montgomery, Bucks. And I think Ron DeSantis could even flip Bucks County. I know Bucks County is like one of the more conservative, more swing counties of the Philadelphia suburbs. Combining with that, DeSantis will likely perform the same or even outperform Trump in rural areas. And on top of that, he will probably improve in Allegheny and nearby counties. So that's a perfect recipe for DeSantis. So I think Pennsylvania will be like 2 to 3 points in favor of the GOP. Moving on to the state of New York, Harris gets it by likely safe. Vermont safe, no doubt. Massachusetts, Rhode Island. Maybe Rhode Island will be much more competitive, but it's still probably gonna be safe Dem state. Maine's first, probably safe Dem. Very suburban, very millennial heavy in it too. However, Maine at large will be fairly interesting as Maine at large. I think the second district that's solid for DeSantis, but I'd say Maine at large would tilt towards Harris. I mean, Maine is like a weird state. It's a very independent state too, so like it depends on which way the independents go in Maine. But like you could also see like a lot of smaller parties doing better in Maine because a lot of the voters are because with ranked choice voting, a lot of the voters aren't beholden to voting Democrat or Republican. So you could see like a lot of third party voters, like particularly on the Democratic side, you can see like a lot of third party voters. So like Howie Hawkins runs again. I think a lot of more liberal, more progressive voters will probably put him as first choice and Harris as second. But I still think Maine is still but like on social issues, Maine is relatively secular, and DeSantis' social conservatism might not bold very well, but because much of New England and the Mid Atlantic, they are relatively liberal on social issues, so you can't run as a hard right candidate. Like you can't be like, I want to outlaw, I want total abortion, or I'm gonna like ban homosexuality. That might work in a state like Texas or Florida, but not in the Northeast. If you run as that type of candidate, forget about it. New Hampshire is interesting because New Hampshire is like a fiscally conservative but socially liberal state, and Chris Sununu embodies exactly what New Hampshire politics. But I'd say Harris's unpopularity would be a big factor here. But if I were to choose a side, I would probably say New Hampshire would probably tilt towards DeSantis. I know a lot of you guys will be like, if New Hampshire you're giving Republican, Minnesota you're giving Democrat, but I think DeSantis would do better with educated voters and with small town voters. Because even in New Hampshire, small town voters are relatively liberal, are relatively conservative too. And as long as like DeSantis doesn't like pivot hard to the right on social issues, I think he should be fine. But like New Hampshire is a state that goes back and forth, and it usually votes against incumbents too. So incumbents or incumbent administrations. So New Hampshire, I can definitely see tilting Republican. Connecticut will probably be a likely Democratic state. It'll probably go to Harris by about 9 to 10 points in favor of Harris. Maryland, that'll probably remain safe. And oops, I did not mean to rate Virginia. And and Delaware probably will give that as likely. A lot of African Americans, and I think if Biden campaigns for Harris in Delaware, I think Harris will get Delaware maybe by 6 to 7%. In New Jersey, will probably rate that as lean Democrat. I mean, New Jersey was the closest safe state for President Biden, and Harris is just so unpopular, and it's still probably going to vote Democrat either way because New Jersey has a lot of ethnic minorities, and the Hispanics are not like the Cuban. And the Cubans in New Jersey, quite interestingly, actually vote Democrat, which I find really surprising. But each state is different, so um, sorry guys for the background noise. I have no idea what's going on, and please bear with it, guys. It's just I don't know. I'm sorry, guys, for the background noise. I really didn't mean to bother anybody whatsoever. So, now moving down south in the state of Virginia. Virginia is really interesting because in 2021 we saw a big shift in favor of the GOP, and the GOP is now really playing their cards right in the state of Virginia. Like, if you guys haven't heard, that there are like a lot. The Democratic Party wants to enlist some of its voters to register as Republicans, vote for the most extreme guy in the GOP. It's as like to get him nominated, and then the Democrats vote for their good guy, and then that's how the Democrats plan to play. And I think it'll ultimately backfire on them. I just have no fucking idea why they do what type of shithousery is that. I just really hate the idea of like opposite party voters coming into another primary just to tank one party deliberately. It just that's just shithousery at its best, and it just fucking ridiculous. I just don't know why that's even allowed. But and it's not just the Republicans who do that too. It's also the Democrats, and Democrats are even successful at one thing. Like, I think they got Mastriano, but as you guys may have seen in my most recent one, I actually had Mastriano winning because, well, it might have been an unpopular pick and certainly something I was not comfortable with, but I think it's the right thing because you can see I've seen like a lot of channels like where the populist New Yorker, Buckeye Politics, American Predictions. I've seen like a lot of people say that there are a lot of Mastriano signs and the enthusiasm with him. So if Mastriano could moderate his stances a bit in the general and while appeasing the Trump base, I think he could pull it off. I think we can't just write him off. Anyway, that's besides the point. But like Virginia, I think if someone like Glenn Youngkin was on the ticket, I think DeSantis could take Virginia. Excuse me. If someone like Mike Garson, there's oh my fucking god, sorry guys, Glenn Youngkin was on the ticket. I think DeSantis could take Virginia, but Virginia is sort of like a Democratic state, like a Democratic leaning state. But I'd say I it would be really hard. Like, I mean, it would be really close for either party. Like, I don't think like DeSantis would either take it super narrowly, or Kamala Harris takes it super narrowly on a razor thin margin, like 200 votes or something. But I would say I would probably give Virginia as tilt Republican. I would give Virginia as tilt Republican. I know this is a very like controversial one. I know this is many surprising for a lot of you guys, but if Virginia did swing by like 12 points and Republicans literally had a clean sweep in 2021, combined with the growing momentum in 2022 into 2023, and if DeSantis campaigns just right and does not piss off the suburban voters, I think he can probably claim Virginia. Although he may need to pick Glenn Youngkin, but I think Mike Garcia would be a good pick, as Virginia has a lot of ethnic minorities, particularly in the more urbanized parts of the state. Maybe so if he can like effectively do more minority outreach, I could see Virginia flipping. Like, DeSantis has many good running mates. Like, he could pick Mike Garcia, or he could pick um Glenn Youngkin, who's the governor of Virginia. He could pick Winsome Sears, or he can pick Jason Yares, or he can pick Daniel Cameron, who's the AG of Kentucky. And I mean, there's so many like options for DeSantis has. He could even pick a female if he wants to diversify his ticket too. But I think DeSantis does have a lot of good picks if he chooses to run. But my biggest worry is there's like a lot of tension in the GOP primary, so I'm not sure if many of you right wingers are following this. But like, DeSantis is now leading Trump in the Republican primary, and I'm not sure how Trump will respond to that. And I guarantee you guys, he's probably not going to be happy with it. So guys, keep me posted on that. I'll keep you guys posted on that, and yeah. North Carolina, that is just likely Republican. I mean, if Virginia is flipping, North Carolina is guaranteed to be a likely state. Florida, likely he's popular. I don't really need to explain that. Oh, I forgot to rate DC. That is safety no matter what. Georgia, I think Georgia would be likely Republican. I think Georgia could probably flip back to what it was in 2016 when it was like 5.1% for Trump. I think Harris would certainly see decreased turnout in Atlanta, and suburban turnout would drop and even increase some support for DeSantis. So that is my predictions for the 2024 election. DeSantis wins with 330 to Harris's 208. So if you guys like this prediction, please like, share, and subscribe. If you guys disagree, please let me know why and what calls do you necessarily disagree with. This channel is always open for debate. I'm okay with constructive criticism, but just not anything that harms me. Anyway, I'll see you guys all in the next video. Libertarian election predictions out.